This is Steve Potasic, Superintendent of Jacksonville School District 117. Thank you for downloading this narrated online presentation of our progress on establishing defined elementary boundaries for all students. Since Franklin Elementary was closed in 2012, the students living in the Franklin boundary have been distributed throughout the other 6 district elementary schools through the Franklin Choice Program. This is phase 1 of the process to define boundaries for all students and includes preliminary analysis on some possible low-impact scenarios. We have the option of pursuing either a low-impact solution or going through an entire district large-scale reboundary process. I will discuss the larger process later in this presentation. The low-impact process is designed to find a solution that would merge the current Franklin boundary area into the adjacent elementary school boundaries, therefore limiting the impact to families throughout the community. This is an important process for the entire community, and this presentation was designed to help you give us an informed opinion on our community survey. A link to the survey is included at the end of this presentation. By keeping this a PowerPoint presentation, you will be able to advance or review all slides at your convenience. Throughout this process, the district will be committed to 2 foundational beliefs. The first is that all District 117 students, families, taxpayers deserve their own elementary boundary. And the second is that this process is about moving the district and community forward. The end result of this process will be to give the Board of Education recommendations that have been developed with community input, minimize impact on the community, maximize district resources, and are equitable and balanced. We also want this process to be very transparent, flexible, and timely. Here are some answers to some commonly asked questions. When will any changes happen? We want any changes in the student boundaries to coincide with the 6th grade students moving to Jacksonville Middle School in the fall of 2018. What will happen with current students when the changes are made? I am often asked about the possibility of grandfathering students, allowing them to remain at their current schools if their boundary is changed or if they are currently in Franklin Choice. Please understand that any changes in boundaries will only impact current grades K through 3. The current 4th grade classes will be at Jacksonville Middle School in the fall of 2018. The district does have the desire to allow grandfathering for our older students, those that will be in the 4th or 5th grade in the fall of 2018, but a more thorough analysis will be needed to see if the schools have the capacity to receive both new students from newly created boundaries and grandfathered students. I hope to have this analysis done quickly after a scenario is finalized. Are these the only options? Well, based on community input, one scenario has already been added to this presentation. All viable options will be analyzed. Here is a current map of the 222 square miles that make up Jacksonville Public School District 117, and this map is broken into the 7 separate elementary boundaries. They include Murrayville-Woodson, South, Eisenhower, North, Franklin, Lincoln, and Washington. This map shows a close-up of the Franklin school boundary. This is the area that we need to distribute amongst the adjacent schools to ensure that all students, taxpayers, and families in Jacksonville School District 117 have a defined elementary boundary. You see in this map that the adjacent schools are North Elementary, Lincoln Elementary, Washington Elementary, and South Elementary. This map shows the Washington Elementary School boundary, and it shows the common boundary that is shared between Washington Elementary and Eisenhower Elementary. That will come into play in several scenarios. One of the most difficult obstacles in starting this limited impact process was where to begin. I started developing solutions by first looking at South and Washington based on the fact that they will not be gaining classroom space when the 6th grade students move to Jacksonville Middle School in the fall of 2018. Currently, the kindergarten students from both South and Washington elementaries attend classes in the central office. When the 6th grade students move to Jacksonville Middle School, the kindergarten classrooms from the central office will return to their home schools. Therefore, South and Washington are our only elementary schools that will not gain classroom space and have the largest risk of being overcrowded with any scenario. I decided to start with South Elementary for 2 reasons. First, Morton Avenue, here highlighted with the red laser pointer, serves as a very obvious boundary for South Elementary. Second, South Elementary is more at risk of overcrowding. Currently, South has an average class size of 24.6 students. This ties South with Eisenhower as our 2 largest class average schools. While establishing Morton Avenue as the new boundary for South makes sense, I needed to ensure that this would not overcrowd South. I evaluated the impact of this new boundary by first finding out how many current students from the Franklin boundary are attending South Elementary through the Franklin Choice program, and comparing this to how many students would be attending with this new boundary. You'll see many of these charts throughout the rest of this presentation. Each chart examines the change in enrollment at a school for every possible scenario. This column, titled Morton Gain, shows that there are currently 47 students living in the Franklin boundary area south of Morton Avenue. These are counted as added enrollment to South Elementary with the Morton scenario. This column, entitled Franklin Loss, shows that there are currently 53 students from the Franklin boundary area attending South through the Franklin Choice program. This number counts as a reduction in enrollment for all scenarios due to the fact that Franklin Choice will no longer be needed since all students will have a defined boundary. This column, entitled Total Difference, shows that South Elementary would have a reduction of 6 students following the Morton Avenue scenario. Please remember that South will not be gaining classroom space when the 6th grade students move to JMS. Therefore, this scenario is a viable option since it will not overcrowd South. Also, this Morton scenario maximizes district resources by limiting transportation costs. Maximizing resources is one of our goals. So we are able to establish a new south boundary of Morton Avenue. Here's one section of the survey you were being asked to fill out and submit. This chart includes all of the scenarios in this presentation. I will come back to this chart after each scenario to help you understand the survey, ensuring accurate feedback. The first question, titled South Elementary Morton Avenue Boundary, is asking for your input on the Morton Avenue scenario I just presented. Please respond in the range from 1, you strongly disagree with the Morton Avenue scenario, to 5, you strongly agree with the Morton Avenue scenario as presented. Please wait to fill out questions 2 through 9 until I have gone over those scenarios or those items later in the presentation. After South, the next school that I needed to look at was Washington, primarily because Washington is at risk of being overcrowded due to the fact that Washington will not be gaining 6th grade classroom space because the kindergarten students from the central office will be moving into Washington in the fall of 2018. But before I could investigate Washington scenarios in more detail, I needed to know how many students are currently going to Eisenhower and North due to the Franklin Choice program. We currently have 29 students attending Eisenhower Elementary and 43 students attending North Elementary from the Franklin School District area. given the fact that Eisenhower will lose 29 students and North will lose 43 students, and both will lose their 6th grade students to Jacksonville Middle School in the fall of 2018, both schools will have a reduction in enrollment between 60 and 80 students. This means that we can place students at either Eisenhower or North from Franklin, Lincoln, or Washington in any future scenario. This is a screenshot of one of the maps that you can go look at on our school locator program, which is on the front page of our main website, jsd117.org. On that program, you can see the school boundaries of all of our elementary schools. They are highlighted with these red lines. This is the once Franklin boundary. Up here is the Lincoln boundary. This is a little bit of North Elementary. And over here is Washington Elementary. This map shows that there are 3 elementary schools north of Morton adjacent to the Franklin boundary area. We can move addresses from the Franklin boundary area into Washington Elementary, Lincoln Elementary, or North Elementary. Please remember that South Elementary is at capacity with developing a new boundary line of Morton Avenue. I initially looked at 2 different scenarios in defining elementary boundaries for the remaining Franklin area. In one possible scenario, I used State Street as the new boundary. I calculated how many students in the Franklin boundary live south of State Street and north of Morton Avenue. These students would become Washington students. The students north of State Street would become Lincoln students. I then did the same calculation using College Avenue as the boundary. There are currently 178 K-6 students living south of State and north of Morton. There are 154 students living south of College and north of Morton. I took those numbers and I put them into the Washington gain summary chart. Remember that Washington, just like South, will not be gaining 6th grade classroom space in the fall of 2018. When you add in the 154 students of the college option and the 178 students of the state option, and you take out the 88 current students attending Washington due to Franklin choice, those numbers leave a total differential of 66 students for the one option and 90 students for the other option added into Washington Elementary. At this point in time, I did realize that neither of these 2 options are realistic because they would simply overcrowd Washington Elementary. So I then developed a scenario that would establish Hardin Avenue as the eastern boundary cutoff for Washington Elementary. There are currently 93 students living in this area, which is south of State, west of Hardin, and north of Morton Avenue. These 93 students would then become Washington Elementary students. That leaves 113 students throughout the remainder of the Franklin area. So I added the new scenario, the Hardin option, into the Washington gain summary. It had already been determined that the college option and the state option were not realistic, viable options because they would overcrowd Washington. The Hardin option would add 93 students into Washington Elementary, taking out the 88 students that are there currently with Franklin choice would leave a differential of 5 students. And this is a workable solution. This data supports the Hardin option, which would establish a new Washington boundary that would continue down State Street to Hardin, and then it would go down Hardin to Morton Avenue. Now I would like to revisit the survey So we can go over this Hardin Avenue boundary option. You will see question number 2 is Washington Elementary, State Street, and Hardin Avenue boundary. This is where you would answer if you strongly disagree with that option, ranging to you strongly agree with that option. If we were to stop here with Washington, we would add 5 students into Washington Elementary. Please remember that Eisenhower, over here on the west side, is losing 29 students and 2 6th grade classes. One of the goals that we have in this process is to have an equitable, balanced plan. So I looked on the west end of the Washington boundary to consider some options that would move some students from Washington Elementary into Eisenhower Elementary, hopefully reducing any potential overcrowding for Washington Elementary. So I looked at 2 different options. I first calculated how many students live west of Caldwell and Park Street in this area of the Washington School District, and how many students live west of Pine, Prospect to Gladstone in this area of the Washington School District. It turns out that 15 current students live in the Caldwell Park cutoff. 10 more lived in this expanded area, for a total of 25 students in the Pine, Prospect, Gladstone cutoff. That number fits with the 29 students being lost by Eisenhower Elementary. However, Eisenhower's average class size is 24.6 students. Washington's current average class size is 20.1 students. So we could remain with our current Washington boundary and still have a balanced, equitable plan. I added in those 2 scenarios, the Caldwell Park scenario and the Pine Prospect Gladstone scenario, into the final Washington gains summary sheet to look at the effect on Washington by making an alteration to the western border of Washington Elementary. Remember, after the Hardin option, we have a gain of 5 students at Washington Elementary. The Caldwell Park scenario would move 15 students from Washington into Eisenhower for a differential of negative 10 students at Washington Elementary. The Pine Prospect Gladstone scenario would have moved 25 students from Washington into Eisenhower for a net differential in Washington of negative 20 students. This is a more balanced answer when it comes to overall changes in enrollment with all of the scenarios, but once again, we do not need to adjust the western boundary of Washington based upon average class sizes. This is the starting point of a map that you'll see throughout the rest of this presentation. Once again, these maps come from our school locator program located on JSD117.org. The red lines represent the current existing elementary school boundaries. For the remainder of the scenarios, I have drawn Washington's boundary with the Hardin option on the east side and the Pine, Prospect, Gladstone option on the west side. However, all 3 of the possible west side boundaries, the Pine, Prospect, Gladstone option, the Park, Caldwell option, or the existing western boundaries, all work and are viable solutions. 2 of the western boundary options for Washington Elementary are included on the survey. Question 3 asks for your thought on the Caldwell Park boundary, from once again strongly disagree to strongly agree. Question 4 asks for your thought on the Washington Elementary Pine, Prospect, Gladstone boundary. If you would prefer for the boundary to remain where it is on the western side of Washington Elementary, I would recommend putting strongly disagree on both of those 2 boundaries. Before I go any further, I would like to address the far eastern edge of the Franklin boundary area. We currently have 7 students living in Prairie Knolls subdivision, and 11 students living here, south of Morton. We have North Elementary students living very close to Prairie Knolls that are picked up by a district bus. We also have students living across the street in Rolling Acres that will receive transportation in many scenarios. In fulfilling our objective to maximize district resources, we will define these boundaries based on transportation efficiency. So the Prairie Knolls subdivision will be picked up by this bus route and go to North Elementary, and all of these students will be picked up by the same bus. The students over here, south of Morton, are within 1.5 miles of South Elementary and do not receive busing services. If these students were to be placed at South, we would have to create a separate bus route to drive out and pick those students up. Now that working, viable options have been developed for South and Washington Elementary, we next need to look at how these scenarios are impacting Lincoln Elementary. This initial Lincoln gain summary chart shows that the Hardin option, which was necessary to not overcrowd Washington Elementary, would place 113 students into Lincoln Elementary. There are currently 39 students attending Lincoln Elementary through Franklin Choice. Therefore, the differential in the Hardin option would place 74 extra students into Lincoln Elementary. Remember, once again, the college option, the state option, were not viable options because they overcrowded Washington Elementary. I now had to explore solutions to address the overcrowding of Lincoln, including moving current Lincoln students into adjacent schools. The only adjacent schools with room are North Elementary or Eisenhower Elementary. Remember that both of those schools will have sizable reductions in enrollment in the fall of 2018. I divided the areas of the current Lincoln school boundary that are adjacent to North or Eisenhower into separate sections and calculated the current students in each section. This helped in developing scenarios to address potential overcrowding of Lincoln. This map shows that there are 46 students living in the Lincoln boundary north of Walnut. There are 7 students in the Lincoln boundary east of Myrtle. These are 6 students in the current Franklin area that come into play in a scenario later. I divided the western edge of the Lincoln boundary into 4 areas created by Diamond, Pine, and the railroad track. The numbers in those sections help develop 3 Lincoln scenarios to help with the overcrowding of Lincoln. They are the Walnut scenario, the Walnut West scenario, and the East-West extended scenario. During the community presentation at Washington, a community member asked a question which led to the development of a 4th scenario that is given later in this presentation. In the Lincoln Walnut scenario, the 46 students that live in Lincoln's school district north of Walnut, the students from up in this area, would simply go to North Elementary. That would be the only change in the Lincoln Walnut scenario. The Lincoln Walnut West scenario is very similar to the Lincoln Walnut scenario in that the 46 students living north of Walnut, this area up here, would be going to North Elementary. But it would also extend this existing North Elementary area further into the Lincoln area, increasing the number of students on that current bus route. That would put 11 students here and 46 students here for a total of 57 students to North Elementary, and would put these 16 students into Eisenhower. Now, this area for between Eisenhower and Washington is still in development, so those items could change even with support of this scenario. This boundary between North and Lincoln would become Diamond, and this boundary here would be the railroad tracks. The Lincoln east-west extended scenario is very different from the previous two. What it does is take this north boundary over here on the east side of Lincoln and extend it to capture those 7 students living east of Myrtle and these 6 students in the Franklin area. Over here on the west side, it would take these 11 students that were previously discussed in the Lincoln Walnut West scenario and add in these 11 students also to north. Therefore, you would gain 35 total students to north, and these 5 students then would go to Eisenhower. Once again, that is dependent upon the final scenario solution and final plan of the Eisenhower-Washington border. This chart summarizes the Lincoln gain summary for those 3 scenarios. Starting with the Hardin scenario for Washington, giving a net gain of 74 students to Lincoln, the Walnut scenario would take 46 students to north, having Lincoln with a net gain of 28 students. The Walnut West scenario would have 73 students lost from Lincoln to both a combination into North and Eisenhower for a net gain of 1 student. And the East-West extended scenario would have a total of 40 students moving to both North and Eisenhower for a total gain of 34 students. Given the fact that Lincoln will be losing its 6th grade students to the junior high and then will be gaining the classroom space because kindergarten students are not moving to Lincoln, all of those scenarios are viable options. How do these scenarios impact North and Eisenhower? This Eisenhower gain summary chart shows that in the situation where Eisenhower loses 29 students due to the loss of the Franklin Choice Program, if it were to even gain the high amount of 25 students with the Pine Prospect Gladstone boundary with Washington, it would have a net change of -4 students. It would not gain any students with the Walnut scenario. It would gain 16 students with the Walnut West scenario for a differential of 12 students, and 5 students in the East-West extended scenario for a differential of 1 student. Here are the numbers for the North gain summary. Since we are sending those 7 students at Prairie Knolls to North, we subtract out the 43 students lost to the elimination of the Franklin Choice Program. The net differential for North is -36 students. Gaining the 46 students from the Walnut option will have a net gain of 10 students. Gaining 57 students from the Walnut West option will have a net gain of 21 students. And gaining 35 students from the East-West extended option will have a net loss of 1 student. I created a summary gain chart for each scenario that shows the net change in each school for each scenario. This is the gain chart for the Walnut scenario. This is the summary gain chart for the Walnut West scenario. And here's the summary gain chart for the East-West extended scenario. Going back to the survey, you will see that the 3 Lincoln scenarios are questions 5, 6, and 7. During the presentation at Washington Elementary, I was asked if we had the goal of limiting the impact on community members, is there a way that we could have the Franklin area go to North Elementary, thereby not having to adjust anyone who lives currently in Lincoln Elementary? Since this did fit in with one of our objectives of limiting the impact on the community, I looked into that to examine the numbers more closely. You will see here in a minute that it is a very possible solution, but I am concerned about the aspect of maximizing district resources and that we would be busing a substantial number of students from this area entirely through the Lincoln district to go to North Elementary. But the numbers work very well. I separated the Franklin area down into 4 separate subsections. This area to the west of Hardin and south of State will be going to Washington with the Hardin scenario. There are 22 students living in this area north of State. These are the 6 students that are previously mentioned in the east-west extended scenario, and that leaves the 85 students living here and the 7 students out at Prairie Knolls for a total of 92 students. So, with having the Hardin boundary dividing the area between Washington and what would be north, and State Street dividing this area from Lincoln and north, we can take all of these students up to North Elementary, but once again, they would be traveling through Lincoln's school district. The North gain summary shows that the 92 students gained from this North extended scenario, taking out the 43 students lost from Franklin Choice, would give North a net gain of 49 students. That actually is a number that fits very well with North, because with that number of students, North would be guaranteed to have 2 classes per grade level each year, and therefore not have to have splits. This North extended scenario would also result in Lincoln having a loss of 11 students. And here is the summary gain chart for the North extended scenario. The North Elementary North extended scenario is question number 8 on your survey. A district-wide large-scale boundary process would basically start with the complete removal of all current boundary lines. This would be a very extensive process that would include community committees, consultants, GIS data, and population analysis. I do not have the information to even come close to making a prediction of what the outcome would look like, but I have been able to analyze the potential impact this would have on the community based solely on numbers. I started looking at the impact a large-scale process would have on the community by first establishing some goals or objectives that would direct the large-scale process. I looked at 2 possible objectives. The first being to balance average K-5 class sizes across the district, and the second was to maximize district resources. I want to highlight scenario 1 with the objective to balance class sizes. We currently have 1,395 K-5 students. If 5 of our elementary schools had 2 classes per grade level, and Murrayville-Woodson had 1, Murrayville-Woodson only has 10 classrooms, we would have a total of 66 classrooms K-5 throughout the district. This would establish a district average of 20.1 students in each classroom. To get our 6 elementary schools to that average, shown here, we would have to make major adjustments in our current boundaries. Eisenhower would have to lose 35 students. Lincoln would lose 10 students. Murrayville would gain 15, North would gain 55, South would lose 40, and Washington would gain 15. This supports that there will very likely be major changes in the current boundaries going through a large-scale process. Since I arrived in Jacksonville in the spring of 2013, I've been asked by many people about the possibility of the school district moving to attendance centers. However, there is one major obstacle preventing a move to the pure attendance center model. we do not have even one elementary school large enough to house 2 complete grade levels. Therefore, if we went to attendance centers, our elementary students would attend a different school every year, and I cannot support that. However, at the Washington presentation, I was asked about a hybrid attendance center model. This would take our 6 schools and create 3 pairs of schools. All of the K through 2 students in one pair would attend one school, and the grades 3 through 5 would attend the other. Without going into detail, I can easily do a complete presentation on the educational gains we would see in this hybrid attendance center model. I want to highlight 3 positives. First, the possibility of bringing back programs like band and sports into our elementary schools would be greatly increased. It is much more cost-effective to provide those services to 5th grade students at 3 locations versus 6. Next, our staff would be able to work together with more teachers that are teaching the same grade level. This would greatly increase our opportunities for professional growth. Also, with more students at each grade level in a building, our opportunities for talented and enrichment programs will greatly increase. On the other side, this model would increase our transportation costs. Regardless, it is the right time to consider the feasibility of this model during a reboundary process. I first looked at the feasibility of a hybrid attendance center model by examining the differences that would be created between the 3 pairs of schools with the current scenarios that we're looking at in this limited boundary process. In partnering Eisenhower and Washington, Lincoln and North, and South and Murrayville-Woodson, and in Eisenhower and Washington averaging 4 classes per grade level, Lincoln and North averaging 4 classes per grade level, South and Murrayville-Woodson having 3 classes per grade level because Murrayville-Woodson only has 10 classes, the scenarios we're looking at fit into this model extremely well. I want to highlight the Walnut West scenario would end up with each of those schools having an average class size of 21.6 students, 21.7 students, and 21.9 students. Therefore, this hybrid attendance center model is very feasible given the limited impact scenarios we're looking at. The last question on the survey is a very important question for this community. It looks at the hybrid attendance center model. We need community input. Does the community strongly disagree, ranging all the way to strongly agreeing with this model? The answer to question number 9 will help direct the district and the board moving forward. Do we not look any further at a hybrid attendance center model, or do we explore it in more detail? Please visit JSD117.org for a link to an online version of the survey. We will also make paper copies of the survey available at the central office. The survey will be open through Tuesday, January 17th, so we can compile the data and give it to the Board of Education at the board meeting on Wednesday, January 18th. When you take the survey, you will be asked for your address. Your address will be converted into a code based on this map. By giving your response a code, we will be able to highlight the survey results from specific areas of our community. While everyone's responses are important and will be evaluated, this coding process will allow us to know how people that are being directly affected by a scenario feel about that scenario. We are committed to receiving community input during this process. Please take the survey and urge your neighbors to do the same. Thank you for watching. Look for the second round of engagement sessions in late January or early February, at which I will share the survey results with the community and discuss the district's plans on moving forward.